I just want to tell you really quickly that if tonight there is a full moon and a lunar eclipse, and I read in Susan Miller's Astrology Zone today that what is highlighted are moments of clarity. So I'm going to tell you that. So I'm going to tell, I actually have a little title for my talk, and it's The Power of Myth and the Power of Poetry. And then when I was sitting at the bar listening to this wonderful ladies beforehand, I was thinking of, do you know that when Stravinsky wrote The Rite of Spring, Le Sacre du Printemps, he said, I am the vessel through which passed Le Sacre. And that's sort of apt for what I'm going to talk about. In 1995, I got a call from a young clarinetist. His name was Todd Palmer. And I knew him. He had been coming to all my concerts. I really liked him, and he played beautifully. He was a young concert artist winner. And he wanted me, he asked me if I would write a piece for him. He had been touring the country with Kathleen Battle, the great African-American soprano, and they were doing The Shepherd on the Rock, which is Schubert's last, his penultimate piece from 1828, and it's stunning piece for piano, soprano, and clarinet. And so he wanted a companion piece for that. And it was a very stressful time in my life because I was, at the time, my partner, Jeffrey, had AIDS, and we were in a difficult passage. So really, I probably shouldn't have said yes at all, but I'm a composer, so I always need the money. So I said yes. And so first I said, Todd, let me think about what the text is going to be. Like, let me look for a poem. And I looked for a poem, and nothing came of it, and mostly I was procrastinating anyway. So we met, and I said, I think I'm going to write the text. And then we met a few weeks later, and I was like, I don't really have anything. And then we met again, and this time I was so stressed out, and I said, Todd, I think all I can do is write you something for clarinet and piano. I don't have it in me right now. But then he had given me the money, and he was so pissed at me. He was just like, whatever. So that night, I went to sleep, and this is the moment of clarity and the power of myth. I went to sleep, and Jeffrey and I were sleeping in the same bed, and at 4 a.m., I awakened, and I had a dream. And in the dream, it was the entire Orpheus and Eurydice myth in my head, but Todd was Orpheus. And Todd was a very attractive young man. He had been a figure skater. And so I even saw how he was dressed. He was dressed in one of those blue and white Apache T-shirts, those French T-shirts. And I saw that Eurydice was in yellow. Anyway, I got up, I went to the dining room table, and I wrote down, Orpheus played his pipe, music like a cool blue stripe circling the heavens. Within an hour, I had the entire libretto for this opera. And I knew that I was going to have to tell Todd, thank you. But the really interesting thing, and by the way, I knew it's not going to be 10 minutes, but the really interesting thing is that the arc of the piece is in 2 acts. The first act is about the birth of love. That act ends with Orpheus singing to Eurydice, with you, my heart begins to know the way in which the world I see is me, and I am it somehow. I am part of something now. And then Act 2 opens, and in Act 2, Eurydice has become ill. And by the end of the piece, so the whole first part of the second act is about her illness and then her death and grief. And it ends with rebirth. So the last lines of the opera are, where spirit sets the soul to rise, the barrenness of winter skies, the vibrancy of summers, their music lies, O sound unearthly, Orpheus has birthed thee. So It's all about the birth of love and then the birth of art through suffering. But here's the weird thing. The story of the shepherd and the rock. It begins with the shepherd is on the rock singing about the echoes from the valley below. And it's all about joy. And then she sings, then the next part is about grief and loneliness. And the last part is about rebirth. So the weird part of that, not only that I sort of wrote my own 75-minute, Shepherd on the Rock, but that myth at that moment in my life came to me because I needed to tell the story of what was happening to Jeffrey and I, and that entire piece came to me. And when, as you know, when someone is dying from AIDS, they die incrementally, and every day there's less of them. And there's a line in that piece, Orpheus says, as she slept, he wept bitterly and dearly, growing more and more bereft as in increments she left. And so that is that part of the story is for me about a myth coming to me out of nowhere to allow me to tell the story of what was happening to me. And then we premiered at Lincoln Center in 2005 and won the Obie Award. So, yay, okay. Now, I have to make sure I stay within 10 minutes. So the next part of the story is August 1st, 1996, Jeffrey died. Obviously, I was completely, it's as if I never knew the meaning of the word grief, and suddenly I was in a foreign country and no one spoke my language. I had a friend named Michael Klein, a poet. Sebastian has read with him. And Michael said, she talks like this. He said, you have to read Mark Doty's Heaven's Coast, which was a poet. Mark Doty wrote a memoir of grief about his lover Wally dying. I read this book. I found Mark Doty's telephone number. I called his home in Provincetown. Anyway, basically I said, you have to be my friend. And I'm coming to Provincetown. So, because the way I felt was, I need to be where poets are. No one in my world, I felt like no one was speaking the language of grief, and I was so decimated. I needed to be around poets, and that was a moment of clarity. So I went to Provincetown, and one day I did, after my morning AA meeting, I went and found Mark in front of his little house at 19 Pearl Street, and just like in the book, he was doing his roses. He had the most incredible garden. And we became friends for that summer. And his lover at the time was Paul Lisicki, who's a great writer. And I'm actually going to be his interlocutor at the Center for Fiction with his new Joni Mitchell book. But the way I want to end my talk is, so I met all these poets, and I felt like my life was changed by them. One of those poets, one day I walked into a bookstore, and I read a poem by a woman named Marie Howe. And the poem was called What the Living Do. And I froze in that bookstore. It was as if I needed to insert that poem inside of me in order to get through the rest of my life. So I really just want to finish by saying that poem to you. So Marie wrote What the Living Do after her brother Johnny died of AIDS. It took 8 years. One of the reviews said, there aren't words for a book this beautiful. And this is the penultimate poem in the book. Johnny, the kitchen sink has been clogged for days. Some utensil probably fell down there. And the Drano won't work, but smells dangerous. And the crusty dishes have piled up, waiting for the plumber I still haven't called. This is the everyday we spoke of. It's winter again. The sky's a deep, headstrong blue, and the sunlight pours through the open living room window because the heat's on too high in here and I can't turn it off. For weeks now, driving or dropping a bag of groceries in the street, the bag breaking, I've been thinking, this is what the living do. And yesterday, hurrying along those wobbly bricks in the Cambridge sidewalk, spilling my coffee down my wrist and sleeve, I thought it again, and again later while buying a hairbrush. This is it. parking, slamming the car door shut in the cold. What you called that yearning. What you finally gave up. We want the spring to come and the winter to pass. We want whoever to call or not call, a letter, a kiss. We want more and more and then more of it. But there are moments walking when I catch a glimpse of myself in the window glass, say the window of the corner video store. And I'm gripped with a cherishing so deep for my own blowing hair, chapped face, and unbuttoned coat that I'm speechless. I am living. I remember you. Thank you.